Uh, this is the second part of the chapter Circulatory System in Humans. We start with page number 74, Heartbeat and Cardiac Cycle. Okay. Now, what is heartbeat and what is cardiac cycle? We know that the heart is lined with a special type of muscle which works endlessly, tirelessly for our entire life. That is cardiac muscle, the involuntary muscle called cardiac muscle. So all the heart muscles do not contract at the same time. They, of course, the heart pumps the blood, so it has to contract and relax. Contract and relax. But it doesn't happen. All the cardiac muscle do not contract and relax at the same time. The arteries contract first. The auricles contract first, forcing the blood into the ventricles. A fraction of a second later, the ventricles contract to push the blood into the pulmonary arteries and the aorta. So when we talk about the heart, and our heart is divided into four chambers. These are the ventricles. These are the auricles, sorry. These are the auricles and these are the ventricles. So when the auricles is full of blood now, it has to go to the ventricle. So the walls of the auricles will contract and the ventricles will relax, of course, and the blood will flow from the auricle to the ventricle. To the auricle and the ventricle. The auricles will contract and the blood flows from auricle to the ventricle through the tricuspid valve and the bicuspid valve. Now what happens is, after this contraction, this will relax. Auricles will relax. Now it's the turn for the ventricles to contract. So the walls of the ventricle, as you know, is thicker because it has to pump the blood away from the heart. So this will take to the lungs, and from this ventricle, from the left ventricle, it goes to the largest. This is the aorta. And this is the pulmonary artery and goes to the lungs. So the auricles first contracts and the blood will flow to the ventricles. After the ventricles are filled with the blood, now the auricles will relax and the ventricle will contract so that the blood is pushed away from the heart. Okay. So the auricles relaxed and the blood flows into them from the pulmonary veins and the vena cava. By this time, the ventricles also have emptied and the whole heart is relaxed. This is referred to as the heartbeat. The contraction and the relaxation of the auricles and the ventricles is called the heartbeat. The sequence of events which takes place during one complete heartbeat is known as the cardiac cycle. So what is cardiac cycle? It is the sequence of events that takes place in one heartbeat is known as the cardiac cycle. It involves repeated contraction and relaxation of the heart muscles. The contraction is referred to as the systole, and the relaxation is known as diastole. The systole and diastole, or systole or diastole, as you may pronounce it. So the contraction is referred to as systole or systole, and the relaxation is termed as diastole or diastole. So the contraction is the systole and the relaxation is the diastole. One complete heartbeat or cardiac cycle consists of one systole and one diastole. It lasts for 0.8 seconds. So the contraction and relaxation together takes up 0.8 seconds of your time. Each heartbeat is heard in two sounds, the lub and the dub, the contraction and the relaxation of the heart. The contraction of auricles make one weak sound, followed by a stronger sound caused by the contraction of the ventricles over here. When the auricles contract, when you hear the lub, dub, the lub is actually L-U-B. Lub is the contraction of the auricles, because the auricle just pushes the blood down to the ventricle. So, the contraction is not very strong. It just squeezes the blood down to the ventricle. But the ventricle now has to squeeze the blood away from the heart. So therefore, the contraction of the ventricle is much more stronger as compared to the auricle. So we have the dub, the lub and the dub. The dub sound, the second sound is the stronger sound, the louder sound. So it causes the lub and the dub. It is all because of the contraction of the auricle followed by the strong contraction of the ventricles. Now, in contraction of the auricles make a weak sound, as we have already discussed earlier, and the contraction of the auricles is the weak one, and the stronger one is the contraction of the ventricles, which pumps the blood away from the heart to from the right auricle, right ventricle. It goes to the lungs through the pulmonary artery, and from the left ventricle, from the left ventricle, it goes to the other parts of the body through the aorta. Now we come, of course, the instrument used to measure the heartbeat is called the stethoscope. It is called what? The stethoscope. The doctors use it, putting the earbuds here and then putting the other flat portion of the stethoscope to your body, and then he measures your heartbeat. And the normal heartbeat, let me tell you, the normal heartbeat of a person is, the average of the healthy person is 72 times in 1 second. 72 times in 1 minute. Okay, I'm so sorry, 72 times in 1 minute. So pulse, when we talk about the pulse, when you go to a doctor, the doctor will measure the pulse in your wrist, isn't it? So it is the throbbing of the artery. It is the throbbing of the artery. Remember, the veins do not throb. It is only the arteries that do. Why? Because there is a very strong pumping of the blood by the ventricles. So there is a pressure. So that pressure is felt inside the blood of the arteries, because arteries take the blood away from the heart, that I've already told you earlier. So when the left ventricle contracts, the blood moves from the arteries under very high pressure. So from the left ventricle, from here, when the blood is pushed away from the heart, it has to go to all the different parts of the body, and the pressure of the blood in the ventricle, from the ventricles to the arteries, through the arteries it goes, it's very strong. The pressure is very high. So the walls of the arteries get stretched by the pressure. As the ventricles relax, the pressure comes down. So the stretching and the relaxation of the relaxing of the arteries with each heartbeat is felt as a throbbing is called a pulse. So the stretching and the relaxation of the arteries, okay, that is called the pulse, because the pressure is the pressure of the blood is very high in the arteries, which comes out from the ventricles. So your pulse rate at which your heart, your pulse is the rate at which your heart beats. So usually it is in for a healthy human being, it is almost average of 72 times in 1 minute per minute. So blood pressure now, since the ventricles always has to push the blood away from the heart in a pressure, the blood always flows through your arteries in the pressure. It has a lot of pressure in it. So the heart must exert pressure to push the blood through the blood vessels, especially the arteries. The force of the blood exerted against the arterial walls by the heart is called the blood pressure. So let me tell you again, the force of the blood exerted against the walls of the arteries, against what? The walls of the arteries is called the blood pressure. The average pressure of the blood produced in the ventricles when they contract and pump the blood into the aorta and the pulmonary artery is called systolic pressure. It is known as what? There are two types of pressure. One is systolic pressure and the other is diastolic pressure. So the average pressure produced in the ventricles when they contract and the blood pump into the aorta and the pulmonary artery is known as systolic pressure. Is the systolic pressure over here. Now, it is equal to the pressure exerted by the column of 120 millimeters. So the average pressure produced when the ventricles get filled with blood from the auricles is known as diastolic pressure. So what is diastolic pressure? The average pressure produced in the ventricles get filled with the blood. So aorta will push the blood into the ventricles. That is known as diastolic pressure. That is known as diastolic pressure. When the larger pressure with which the ventricles pushes the blood away from the heart, that is known as systolic pressure. So there is diastolic and systolic, and the average human being will have the blood pressure of 120 by 80 millimeters of pressure. 120 by 80, please remember. Now, the abnormal functioning of the heart. Okay, the abnormal functioning of the heart. Now, there are some, due to some ailments, we'll have the abnormalities in the heart. So what are they? We will discuss it. Sometimes, due to some defects in the structural components of the heart and the blood vessels, the heart shows abnormal functioning. Number one is palpitation. So, if the palpitation means the pulse beat, the beat of the pulse is more than the 72 times in 1 minute, then we suffer from palpitation. That is called palpitation, and there are various reasons for it. So palpitation makes a person feel as if his heart is beating too fast, or skipping a beat, or it is fluttering. It beats very, very fast. So the person may notice such type of palpitation in the chest, throat, and the neck. So palpitation is usually caused by anxiety and some coronary heart diseases. This may also be caused due to the effect of some medicine. So if you are into medication, some kind of medication, these medicines will also make your heart beat faster, and your palpitation surely increases. And medicines are not the only reasons. The other reasons could be anxiety and some coronary heart diseases. So we talked about palpitation. Now we go to cardiac arrest or the heart attack. Sometimes the heart suddenly stops contracting. This happens because of the narrowing of the blood vessels due to cholesterol and all. It gets, the arteries will get, the blood vessels will get narrow. The lumen will become smaller. The walls of the arteries and the veins become, especially the arteries, becomes thicker, and the space between them in the arteries through which the blood flows becomes lesser. The volume decreases. So therefore high pressure, and the volume is less through which the blood passes through the arteries. So what happens is pressure is created. This occurs especially in the coronary arteries due to the deposition of cholesterol, not only cholesterol but also calcium in the inner walls. So the cholesterol and calcium will get deposited slowly in the walls of the arteries, or rather the blood vessels. So as a result, there is very less supply of blood in the heart, and the heart will stop beating. So that is called the cardiac arrest or the heart attack. So you got to be very, very careful. We must exercise, and we must not have food which have fried foods. So we always should have very, very simple food, as well as we got to exercise regularly to keep your heart and your pressure normal. Next is hypertension or the blood pressure. Sometimes there is a contraction of arterioles. Now the arteries will contract. The constriction takes place. This creates a difficulty in the flow of blood. So since there is a lot of calcium and the cholesterol that is deposited on the walls, and it makes the lumen very, very small. So the deposition makes, or the contraction of the arterioles makes the flow of the blood very, very difficult. So this leads to the high blood pressure or the hypertension. So hypertension or the high blood pressure increases the risk of heart diseases, kidney diseases, diabetes, and even blindness. So nowadays, an increasing number of people are having higher normal values of blood pressure. So we got to be very, very careful in the consumption of food that we eat. We should not eat too much of junk or fried food. Instead, we must have a simple diet and have exercise and do exercise regularly. So with this, we come to the end of the session for today. In the next session, we will talk about the blood groups and the blood transfusion, okay? And which will be followed by the notes later on. So this much for today. Thank you for viewing.